Um, we are in this series that I titled this Love Everyone Always. Now, I thought that was a pretty brilliant title, actually. I think it would be a great bumper sticker, honestly. I thought about trying to make bumper stickers. The problem is, I stole that title from somebody, and I don't even know if the phrase is trademarked. So if you were really impressed with the title, don't be. I did steal it, although I did have a professor one time who said, look, creativity is really knowing who to steal from. So I feel pretty good about who I stole the title from. But here's the thing. This phrase, love everyone always, I do think it would make a great bumper sticker because of this. I think most people would accept it. Like, I think this is one of those things you'd see on bumper stickers on cars everywhere because I think the idea of loving people is universal. I don't think anybody's going to argue with you. You put a love everyone always bumper sticker on your car, probably nobody's going to want to key it off right now. You put a political bumper sticker on your car right now, it might be dangerous to your bumpers. So, but I just think this is a widely accepted concept, right? The idea of loving all people. The problem is not the concept of loving people, right? The problem, we said, is in our expression of that love, right? Because we express love out of how we define love. So love comes as an expression of our definition, how we define this whole idea of love. And to be honest, most of us, for parts of our lives at least, have had very personal interpretations of what it means to love somebody. If you listen to the loudest voices in our community, in our culture, you're going to get an emotionally based definition of the word love. So you're going to get an emotional response and not an intentional act when people talk about love. I love it. Nick Lachey, you remember Nick Lachey, 98 Degrees boy band from the 90s? Come on, there's no 90 kids in here. He has a new TV show. I don't watch it, but it's going to sound like I do because I have a quote from him. He has a new TV show, and he said this last week. He said, love is an emotional connection. The loudest voices in our culture are telling us that love is emotionally based, right? Not intentionally acted upon. And we love, and we love talking about it, but that's the problem, is it's this emotional response. And that is going to leave us open to some bad interpretation, some bad understanding of love. It's going to leave us open to some bad experiences, right? Because be brutally honest, did anybody have a swing in your emotions this week? Now, don't raise your hand for your spouse either, because if you do, you're in big trouble this morning. Just think to yourself, did you have at any point in time this week a change in your emotions throughout the day? If love is simply an emotionally based thing, then every time our emotions change, we're subject to changing who we love, which sounds really like a poor definition of love, and it is. But that's where most of our culture rests. So we started looking and we started talking and we found out this guy, John, who walked with Jesus and recorded a bunch of his words. He started talking about how God is love. And we read and learned that, well, if God is love, there's still definition of that because John also said love comes from God. So it's not just that it's this squishy, undefinable act. It is actually an act that we can understand. And that God modeled love for us first because he first loved us. So there's an intentionality. There's an act of our will that's required for us to love. It's not just us acting on our appetites, our wants, our desires. It's an intentional act. This morning, I want to take it just a step further. Because if we're going to learn to love everyone always, we're going to have to probably overcome one of, I think, the greatest hurdles to love, especially when it comes to loving other people. And it's this, forgiveness. I think forgiveness, the act of forgiving somebody, is one of the biggest hurdles that we face when it comes to loving everyone always. And I want to start by talking to you about this because for some of us, if you grew up in church or around church, or maybe this is just the way you thought about it, we tend to think that if God saves us, if Jesus offers salvation, that most of us have an understanding that we were saved from something, right? And most of us, that what we think about is we were saved from eternal hell. We were saved from this eternal punishment. And that tends to be the thing that we associate with our salvation a lot of times. Now, be honest, don't raise your hands, but how many of you, the first time you really thought about following Jesus, it was because you had some encounter with the idea of hell, right? If you were like me, you grew up in the 70s and 80s, there was some really terrible movies. One in particular, A Thief in the Night, poorly made movie, but it was running around youth groups and people were watching it, and the movie was scary. And so for some of us, our first encounter of thinking about Jesus was because this picture of hell was so horrific. And it is. Eternal punishment is a terrible thing to think about. Some of you, the 90s and into the 2000s, you read a series of books called Left Behind, and that maybe made you think about Jesus for the first time. This idea of tribulation and hell, and it forced you to think about Jesus in a new way, possibly. And again, I'm going to say it is a terrible thing to think about, eternal punishment. Right? Eternal security is a great thing. It's a great gift. It's a great blessing. But if you came to Jesus and all you heard was that he saved you from this, then I'm going to tell you, you are missing out on something right now. Because he didn't just save you from something. He saved you for something as well. In fact, John makes this bold declaration, one of the disciples following Jesus and writing these things down and eventually so that we could read about the life of Jesus. John wrote in John 10:10, he says, there's a thief and he comes to steal and kill and destroy. But Jesus said, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. In other words, there would be full, to have a full life. So salvation does offer some eternal security, an eternal benefit, but the problem is if you follow Jesus, you've been saved for something as well in the moment. And so many times we think about what we've been saved from, and we don't think about what he saved us for. To be able to be in the moment, to walk with God. To have this security about my future, right? To have this confidence that my past has been taken care of, but to also be present in the moment. That he saved me for something. And life's not going to be pain-free and it's not going to be trauma-free. Jesus didn't promise that, but he did promise that you could have an abundant life. You could have a fullness of life in the moment. You could be with people. You can experience relationships to the fullest, and you can enjoy the life that he's put you in the middle of, right? As I say that, though, I realize that a bunch of us, we've been hurt. We've been hurt. We carry a lot of pain. We carry a lot of trauma. We carry a lot of things around with us that weigh us down. Burdens. And when you hear that Jesus said you could have full life, some of you are sitting there and you're just thinking, I don't know that I can get there. You're struggling to figure out what that would even look like. And you're carrying a bunch of weight around with you on your back. And it's funny because science is catching up with the Bible, I think, these days. And even science will tell you that stress and burdens are one of the biggest sources of our illness in our world today. That because of the stress we take up on ourselves, because of the stress we carry around, that we actually will get sick because of it. And so the things that you carry around, that inability to forgive the things that have happened to you, the things that have been said to you, will be a burden, will weigh you down, and could possibly even make you sick. And the thing is, Jesus said, I came so you could have a full life, an abundant life in the present. And that would allow you to keep walking into the future. But the problem is these things that we carry around, they happen in the past. And so a lot of times we're constantly trying to walk forward while facing backwards, right? And we stumble around and we just feel the weight. And some of you this morning, even when you walked in or you're sitting there, you can feel the tension in your shoulders. And you can feel the knot in your stomach. You can feel the stress in your life, and it's distracting you from the moment. It's keeping you from a full life. I found several quotes this week that just I love when people speak about God's truth in different ways. And Maya Angelou wrote this. She said, "It's one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself to forgive." She said, "Forgive everybody." I love that. Martin Luther King, I'm going to read you part of this quote. He said, "We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love." You can't love everyone always if you can't forgive. And then perhaps this is my favorite quote. I picked this up several years ago by Anne Lamott. She is very pointed and I think describes forgiveness in the best way ever. She says, "Not forgiving is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die." When you say, I just am not going to forgive, she said, it's like you're taking the rat poison. You're trying to get rid of the rats that are in your house, but you're not doing it. You're eating the rat poison yourself, and then you're looking and waiting for them to die, and that's not going to happen. When you don't forgive, you're always going to be looking backwards, trying to walk frontwards, and the weight is going to wear you out. So I want to talk about forgiveness for just a second this morning. I want to talk about the idea of what it means to forgive. And before I do that, I want to put a couple of caveats on this thing because I'm aware of the trauma in the room. And not necessarily your personal story. I just know there's trauma in the room. I know some of us have experienced some horrific things. So the first thing I want you to write down, I want you to remember, is that forgiveness is not reconciliation. When we talk about forgiveness, we're not talking about reconciliation. We're not talking about necessarily the relationship's going to be made good between you and another person who wronged you. I hope you always remember that when we speak about forgiveness. Reconciliation is a two-person sport. You have to have both people in agreement. You have to come up with some agreement. Wounds have to be healed. So you can't reconcile something if nobody's going to come to the table and meet you there. It doesn't mean you can't forgive. Forgiveness is a one-person sport, but reconciliation requires the other person to come to the table as well. So when we talk about forgiveness, we're not talking about reconciliation this morning. Forgiveness is also not about forgetting. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. There may be some things in your life that happened to you, and because of that, you're never going to forget what that person did to you, and you also will need to set up some boundaries, some barriers to have a healthier relationship, and that's okay. When we talk about forgiveness, we're not talking about forgetting the past necessarily. Forgiveness is, though, a process. It's a process. It's going to require an ongoing effort. It's not just a one and done type of thing. So when you think about forgiveness, remember this morning, okay? As we go through this. Back in the first century, the rabbis would have taught about forgiveness this way. They would have, at the temple, said, you're supposed to forgive and forgive and forgive. And they would have said it 3 times because they believed you should forgive 3 times. And they believed and taught that because in the Old Testament book of Amos, the prophet would speak for God, and the prophet was telling the children of Israel some things God was saying. And God had said he would forgive his enemies 3 times in this one verse. Well, the rabbis thought if God's going to forgive somebody 3 times, then we should all at least do what God does, right? That we should forgive 3 times. We don't have to do better than God, but we should at least do what God does and forgive 3 times. So they taught, forgive 3 times. Jesus would teach, and his apostles would follow him around, and they were learning, and they were trying to catch up. And I know a lot of times we read about them, and we think, they're not real smart sometimes. But they do grow in their understanding. And there's a passage that I love in Matthew 18 where Jesus is talking and teaching, and Peter gets curious. And so he asks a question about forgiveness. Matthew 18:21, it says, Peter came up, and he said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times. Now look what he just did. As many as 7 times. The rabbis that Peter knew would have taught, forgive 3 times. I love Peter. Peter's a go-getter, okay? Peter's the teacher's pet. Peter's constantly speaking up when he probably shouldn't. Peter takes the rabbi's answer, and look what he says. I'm going to double it, and I'm going to add one extra. I think when Peter said this, he's probably thinking, watch this, guys. I finally am catching on to Jesus. I got an answer. He's going to love this answer. I think Peter's probably thinking, I'm going to be the star pupil after this. He says, Jesus, 7 times, right? Standard's 3. I doubled it. I went 1 extra. Verse 22. And Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times. Peter, where'd you hear that? I didn't say that. But 77 times, or some versions will say 70 times 7. That's what it means. 70 times 7. Now, if you're not good in math and you're panicking, you're sitting there going, okay, what's 70 times 7? Carry this. Stop. You don't have to. When Jesus said that, he said that intentionally because he didn't want you to know the number. It's a big number. He was trying to say, forgive and keep on forgiving. That's what he was telling them. The number doesn't matter. You got to forgive and keep on forgiving. It's an infinite thing. It's a process. It's going to keep going. And he had already been teaching them about this. In fact, if you were to back up in Matthew 6, one day the disciples said, hey, Jesus, teach us how to pray, because they were growing. They were trying to figure out this new rabbi, what he wanted them to understand and how he wanted them to live their lives. And in Matthew 6, they said, teach us to pray. And so Jesus started. He said, when you pray, don't heap up on up empty phrases as the Gentiles do. Don't just stand up and talk about a bunch of stuff, for they think they're going to be heard because they talk a lot, basically. Verse 8, don't be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask. Pray then like this. Now watch what he does. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Pray and recognize who God is. Start there. Verse 10, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Where I am, God, in the moment, use me to bring kingdom power to that moment. Pray that what's going on in the heavenlies will become real on earth. Verse 11, give us this day our daily bread. Feed us, keep us nourished. Verse 12, and forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors. If you've never looked at this, you've never read this, if you've never seen this, I want you to underline the word forgive. And I'm going to teach you a couple Greek words today real quick. I don't do this all the time, but I think this is important. When he says forgive, he's saying aphime, this Greek word aphime. It literally means to send away, to release. I want you to send away, to release these hurts, this trauma, this pain, this thing that's been done to you. Now, it's an interesting story because where they would have gotten this concept of sending away, this word would be from Leviticus 16, the day of Yom Kippur, one of the holy days, the Day of Atonement in the Jewish history. And by the way, it still goes on, and it'll be September 27th this year. The Day of Atonement. And back then, when the temple practices were up and running, they would have brought 2 goats to the front of the temple. One was a goat that would be sacrificed. The other goat, the rabbi, the lead priest, would pray, put his hands on the goat, and transfer symbolically all of the sins of the nation of Israel onto that goat. Then that goat would be taken out into the wilderness and let go, sent away. This is where the teaching comes from, that they were the illustration that when he says forgive is to send away, to release. It's the idea of letting it go. And when I say that, I'm sorry if you're parents of young kids, don't think Elsa and Frozen, but I just kept thinking about it all week. Let it go, let it go, let it go. And I don't even have kids that age, and I haven't seen the movie, but it's out there. The truth is, most of us, though, when I say send something away or let it go, most of us, what do we want? Be honest. What I really want is vindication. If you've weighed me down, if you've put something in my backpack, if you've hurled some kind of hurt or pain upon me, I really would like justice. I really would like retribution. I really would like vindication. I would really like for you to have to pay for what's in my backpack. And for some of us, it's not always big stuff. For some of us, little things have been weighing us down, 3 pounds at a time. You know, somebody took a jab at you last week. Somebody made a sarcastic comment. It's been happening for a while, and maybe it's happened more than once. And so maybe, it's a 3-pound little jab, but maybe there's multiple 3 pounds in your backpack. And you keep it back there just thinking one day they're going to get theirs. And you hold on to it instead of sending it away. And for others, it's more than just a little jab. It's somebody's done you wrong. They've gossiped about you, right? They've tried to shape other people's understanding of who you are. They've tried to malign your character. They've said some things, and it's more like a 5-pound weight. It's a little heavier, a little harder to bear. It's not going to break your back, but if you start throwing a bunch of these in your backpack, it's going to weigh you down. And we've got to learn to send it away. And others of us, unfortunately, the pain's been a little deeper. It's more like a 10-pound weight. Somebody betrayed you. A friend of years. A spouse. Somebody did something to hurt you in a very intentional way. And that 10 pounds gets heavy after a lot of years. And again, maybe it's happened more than once, so maybe it's more than 10 pounds, but that 10 pounds is something you're holding on to and you're not wanting to send it away. And then ultimately, hopefully this is not you. Every illustration goes wrong somewhere. But for some of us, we've got 20 pounds on our back somewhere because we were abused as a child. Physically, emotionally. I heard another story last week of sexual abuse as a teenager by somebody in the church. And what do you do with that? I'm not even sure that's just one 20-pound weight. It might be 50 or 100. And the more you hold on to this, the more you're unwilling to send it away. The more you're unwilling to forgive, the heavier that stuff gets. And the less we're going to be in the moment. The less we're going to be present with God and with others. And it's a painful process. And it's a process. Because the more you start to wake up to this and start to name these things and start to forgive and send them away, here's the problem. You ever wake up a day later, a week later, a year later after you thought you'd forgiven somebody and you realize it's still bothering you? You ever wake up and realize that it's still creating stress and trauma and tension? It's the very reason Jesus said forgive 70 times 7, because it's an ongoing process. You're going to have to do this again. And it's great when you can name it, when you can become aware of it and start to forgive, but it's not just going to be a one-time thing, especially if it was a 20, 30, 40, 50-pound weight. If it's something that disrupted your whole life. A week later, a year later, there's going to be an encounter somewhere. You're going to see a person out, or there's going to be a trigger, a song on the radio, or the smell of something. And it'll trigger it again, and the whole process will start over. I want to show you one more word real quickly about forgiveness. Aphime, send away. Paul uses another word. In Ephesians 4, he's kind of wrapping up his conversation with the Ephesians, and he's talking about what this looks like to live out this Christian life following Jesus. And in Ephesians 4, verse 30, he says, "And don't grieve the Holy Spirit, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption." He says, don't grieve the Holy Spirit who sealed you, that made your future certain. Right? Don't grieve. Don't hold on to these things. Verse 31, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice." Send all that stuff away. Send it away. Forgive. Including your responses. Verse 32, "Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you." Forgiving one another. This Greek word is charizomai. It's actually the word where we get the word grace from. And it's translated forgiving here because he's saying, look, the grace that you receive, extend that same grace to somebody else that you've received. When you become aware of what God has done for you, when you become aware of the grace God has extended you, forgiven you, he said, then forgiveness is extending that saved grace to other people the way you've received it. Jesus frees you from this eternity of punishment, right? Jesus sets that up for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But he frees you from the past as well. He allows you to forgive. And you can be in the moment. And he invites you to experience that freedom of stress and tension, and all those wrongs that were perpetuated in your life by somebody. The abundant life allows us to remember what's been done for us by God and to give away that same grace to other people. So you send it away, you forgive, and you extend that same grace to other people. That's what forgiveness looks like. And it's a gift. It's a gift of God. It's going to free you from the past, free you from punishment in the future, free you to be present in the moment, free you to extend the same gift to other people, free you to have a full and abundant life. You ever heard this phrase that hurt people hurt people? That's a great statement. When we don't forgive and we hold on to those things, we're hurt, we're wounded. Listen, I'm not saying that you aren't justified in being hurt. The things that have happened to people in this room would anger all of us. I get that we all carry certain traumas and things from our past. And we're hurt. But where we are often very blind is how that hurt, how our unforgiveness actually allows us to hurt other people in the process. Sometimes we're not even aware of it. And so we replicate some of our past pain and traumas and experiences. We replicate them without even wanting to, because of what we're still holding on to, the weight that we carry, and the pain that we've experienced, and the trauma that's been in our lives. So the only question really this morning is, where do you need to forgive? Maybe something that you just haven't even named before. Something you've been carrying along. Something that's just been a burden. Something that's weighing you down, that's actually keeping you not just from being in the moment with people, but you can't be in the moment with God either. If he lovingly says to you this morning, are you ready? Are you willing? Would you consider, what is something that you need to name? What is a past pain, a past trauma? Maybe nobody even knows about it around you. Maybe you've lived so long beyond it, like it happened when you were 4, 5, 6 years old, and you're just thinking there's no real reason to even bring it up. But yet for you, internally, on your back, it's a 20-pound weight, and it's weighing you down, and it's keeping you from living the full life. You can't love everyone always if you can't forgive. Jesus invites us to name these things because he'll be there with us. He's reminding you, listen, your future's secure. It really is. But I've got something for you right now. I've got an abundant life for you right now if you're just willing to be brave enough to name what's bothering you. Name the infraction, name the trauma, and send it away. And let the healing process begin. Will you pray with me?